Hi, so I want to talk about Grunty again. Grunty she has this sort of story arc that mostly follows the same kind of structure, right? She is dissatisfied about something and wants to obtain energy to solve that problem. I mean, that's obvious, it's a sort of archetypal fairy tale villain motif, but what's weird about the Banjo series is simply that on the face of it, Banjo-Tooie and Grunty's Revenge, the Game Boy Advance game, are very different from Banjo-Kazooie, because in both of them, Grunty's main goal is to recover her body, to obtain her body again. I mean, you know, in Banjo-Tooie she's a skeleton, and in Grunty's Revenge she can't even get out from under the rock, so she has to use a robot body. And these are always considered like temporary solutions, which she will hopefully overcome by sucking energy from some of the characters and finally reaching her much desired goal of being herself again. So that would make us think that in Banjo-Kazooie she is satisfied because she already is her body, but of course she isn't. Banjo-Kazooie, she has almost exactly the same desire. She doesn't want to be herself. In fact, it's almost as if she doesn't consider her body to be her real body. That, as if in Banjo-Kazooie she is also inside a fake shell that she needs to transcend. She needs to become a different person in order to be herself. So this makes me wonder, you know, all three games are the same kind of quest from Grunty's perspective, at least. And why? Why are they so similar, even when the, you know, Tooie and Grunty's Revenge seem to be separate? They seem to be like post-Grunty's collapse, right? Banjo-Kazooie, Grunty hasn't collapsed from the bridge, and yet all other games after that rely heavily on the fact that Grunty's body is underground. That's a main kind of obstacle that she has. But if you see the way that the first game is also based on an insatisfaction with her own body, then the fact that her body is underground becomes almost an excuse or a symbol of some kind, which in the first game she is already subject to. So I suppose one place I wanted to take this is that, well, if you look at, if you watch Rare's, the official Rare channel, they have these videos explaining different secrets about the making of Banjo-Kazooie, and one of the things that caught my eye is that Banjo 3 was initially going to be a remake of Banjo-Kazooie, but it wasn't going to be a normal remake. It was going to be a remake where the characters are aware that they've lived through that situation before. They're aware, they have all of this, the game itself has like a deja vu about its own state. And so they don't give much information about how this would have played out, but it seems as if what they're trying to say is that it wouldn't have been Banjo-Kazooie, a Banjo-Kazooie remake. It would have been a new game where you move through Banjo-Kazooie and the whole game is different because the characters are are reacting to their own sort of deja vu about already having lived that. And that's strange because it's a time travel narrative, basically, right? It's a time travel idea. You're going back to the beginning and starting again. I was thinking, why was Banjo 3 going to be about time travel? It seems like it's a bit of a sudden departure from the canonical story. But, of course, Grunty's Revenge is also a time travel story. And suddenly it makes you wonder, well, what if time travel is more deeply ingrained into this saga than I thought? That's one aspect of it, that there is already a time travel element. It's almost like you have to remember that the Banjo-Kazooie games include time travel ever since before Banjo-Kazooie. Because what Grunty's Revenge is implying is that the past, in theory 20 years before the events of Banjo-Kazooie, more or less, this sort of story took place. So when we start playing Banjo-Kazooie, we are already playing from a position of having secured the past in Grunty's Revenge. So already the timeline is kind of distorted from the beginning. Okay, so the thing I want to investigate more is if there is a time travel dynamic going on, and Banjo 3 was originally going to be a deja vu version of Banjo-Kazooie, then it opens a strange possibility, which is this. Banjo 3 is simply a return to Banjo-Kazooie, meaning that Banjo 3 doesn't really exist as a separate game. And yet, a trick has been played on the timeline so that we do indeed have 3 games. Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Grunty's Revenge. Grunty's Revenge is the third one. So Grunty's Revenge is Banjo 3 in the timeline. It literally is the third game. And it's the game where you go back to the past. And so supposedly open up a timeline which would allow you to relive Banjo-Kazooie twice. So Grunty's Revenge, as the third game, is the one that would allow the possibility for Banjo 3 to exist as a deja vu. And if you even look at Nuts and Bolts, supposedly, this idea for Banjo 3 is what ended up being Nuts and Bolts, even though the original idea was scrapped. It ended up being Nuts and Bolts, and Nuts and Bolts is much more self-aware about it being a game than the previous ones. It has this deja vu feeling to it, as if, if we were to replay Banjo-Kazooie again from the beginning, the characters would know that they're in a game because they've already lived that before. So that experience, the experience of deja vu, which allows the core structure of the game to become visible to the characters themselves, is the experience that is brought to light in Nuts and Bolts. So in a sense, Nuts and Bolts ends up being the spirit of what Banjo 3 was going to be, almost as if it was inevitable for the series to progress in this way. Yeah. that's why the time travel thing is intriguing me at the moment, and the fact that Grunty's desires have always remained the same, because it seems to suggest that, as in Donkey Kong Country, there is some aspect of this that is reversed, where actually the deeper you go into the game, the deeper you're descending into some sort of a self-awareness of the game itself. In fact, most of the games end with a quiz show hosted by Grunty and so on. So the games seem to bubble up into this boiling point where they become explicitly a game. And that seems to be the end. That's when the game kind of climaxes, is when it reaches this status of game within the game. And that the series as a whole kind of does that with, with Nuts and Bolts and with Grunty's Revenge.